So I'd now like to introduce our first two speakers from GHD. We have Rebecca Want and Rory Waddell. So Rory is passionate about collaboration between all facets of our industry and challenging the established way of working. Rory has managed and delivered a wide variety of infrastructure projects, including rail and water and wastewater projects in Australia, the UK, Ireland and the USA, in a wide variety of contract forms. Rory is General Manager of GHD's Sydney business and a member of GHD's Australian leadership team. He's accompanied by Rebecca Want. So Rebecca received the Australian Rail Industry's Career Achiever Award for 2022 and has been one of the industry's strongest advocates for change and continuous improvement. In her role as market leader for transport, she has accountability for driving business development, something she excels in through her commitment to strong relationships with clients. So if Rebecca and Rory would like to join me.
I've roped Rory in to speak with me today because I just feel,
Willingly.
it's easier anyway. It's great to be with you here today. Thank you. The last time I spoke at a PWI conference was 20 years ago, where I was sharing lessons learned in the construction of the line-wide fit out for the airport line, and so it's great to hear that Piers is doing work and the industry is getting ready for another line-wide fit out contract. We've got a briefing on Monday about that. Jim spoke really wonderfully. I love hearing Jim Betts speak, but the key messages that I always take away from Jim is around collaboration and partnership, and that is very much the theme that I would like to leave with you today. Rory and I are pleased to have the opportunity to share our thoughts with you about doing more with less. I haven't used this clicker. How do I do that? Oh. Anyway, we're happy to be sharing more with less. This is a great topic of a conversation, encouraging us to pause and reflect on how we're working on rail industry here in New South Wales. Our key message is that if we collaborate as partners, we can reduce waste and do more. We acknowledge the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islanders as the traditional owners of the land, water and sky throughout Australia on which we do business. We recognise their strength, diversity, resilience and deep connection to country. Last week there was controversy amongst many contemporaries in the office and a little bit of offence was taken, to be blunt. What caused the kerfuffle? Well, it was a Sydney Morning Herald article published where our Infrastructure Minister Rob Stokes put it out there with a statement. There is general awareness that we've been very conservative and we've over-designed some of the station boxes on the Metro line. Stokes spoke about a compliance culture in New South Wales and how it had led to an intense focus on mitigating risks and liabilities in both government and the private sector. Now, I'm not sure that we agree with a compliance culture. Instead, I think we've got a compliance framework. There is no doubt that our compliance framework is resulting in over-specification of structures, which results in over-engineering and over-design. And I wondered if we worked better together as an industry, whether we could reduce that. When Rory and I sat down to reflect on how we could do more with less in our industry, using Rory's deep experience leading design consultancy, in which he's accountable for managing commercial risk amongst other things, and his advocacy work with Consult Australia, and my experience providing leadership in programs like Sydney Metro and Sydney Trains projects, we thought we could share how, if we collaborate more, with intention that we might waste less. In our thoughts today, we'll share with you those opportunities to define, to do more with less. I'll define waste and the ecosystem of partners. And we'll touch on 3 opportunities to reduce waste, taking an ecosystem view of our time and resources as an industry, minimising waste through effective structuring and appropriate liability regimes, and increasing the uptake of digitisation. So waste is defined as to use too much of something or to use something badly when there is a limited amount of this. In the case of our industry, we know too well that we have limited resources, be it time, people, materials or money. In addition, when we apply a people perspective, we know that wellness means everything and that people's time is precious. We need to be mindful of wasting our time and our resources. I believe that we are all, in our daily professional lives, noticing waste in our infrastructure industry. And the 4 areas are extra processing, overproduction, weighting and defects. So to give you a bit of an example of what I mean by extra processing, in our design review process, I've been on both sides of the table, and we often have more people reviewing the design than doing the design. Hands up if you've ever seen that. Mark Butler is nodding vigorously. Yeah, I think there's more hands, just don't be shy. Overproduction, when we might produce drawings that are not ever referenced or ever used, but it's just the way that we've always done our business. We know that our contractors are using more digital, but as designers we're still required to produce a wad of drawings that aren't necessarily used. Weighting, in my current role, this is the one that causes me a lot of grief. We have a market of organisations and people who, when they're expecting a tender to come to market, sometimes it arrives, usually late, sometimes it doesn't arrive at all. So the weighting. And then defects. When we do redesign or rework, because we've failed at the early onset to describe the requirements, or we might have missed out requirements altogether because we haven't looked at a neighbouring project or an interfacing project. Do any of these resonate with you? And is there anything that you and we can do together to reduce that waste if we collaborate and work as partners? They say it takes a village to raise a child, and similarly, I think it takes an ecosystem of partners to deliver a railway. The partners in the ecosystem range from owners, operators and suppliers to maintainers. And it's likely that if you're here today, you'll fall into one of those groups. If I take that village metaphor around the way that we work together and we treat each other with respect, as partners with kindness and respect, like villages do, then I believe we'll be better off. From a designer's perspective, we'd like to build connections with each of our partners in that ecosystem so that we better understand everybody's needs and we design to meet those needs so that we don't waste with redesign. On the other hand, I really challenge the master-servant relationships that are existing in our industry today. They exist amongst all the partners, from owners to the industry, from constructors to designers. We really need to shift away from master-servant towards partnerships and working in collaboration. I'm going to touch on the first opportunity for waste and then I'll hand over to Rory. I'm advocating that we can reduce waste if we provide a more complete view of the pipeline across the industry. Transport for New South Wales have done a fantastic job providing us with a pipeline of work ahead of us, but I actually think we need to take it a step further. We need to be inclusive, particularly in the rail industry, and to include our operators like Sydney Metro, Metro Trains Sydney, and other rail operators and owners and operators like ARTC. When we do that, we can then look to plan and manage our resources so that we're taking full account and providing full service to the industry and connecting and building those railways. I also think we could be well served to include OPEX as well as CAPEX projects in that. Uplifting the granularity of the industry pipeline data is dear to my heart. We spend a lot of time trying to understand what work is actually coming out and when it might come out. Currently, for example, in the pipeline, there is no data, no tendering or procurement phase for concept designs and EISs. I think if we can get some more data and we can be more respectful of our industry about what's coming up and more collaborative and open, we can save time and do more with less. We attend market briefings which communicate a tender might land in a quarter. That's actually not good enough. We attend market briefings where sometimes we are more confused than not when we come out of them, and we actually then spend time talking to each other, trying to decipher what we get. And we sometimes attend market briefings where we're not allowed to ask questions. I can see some nods in agreement in the audience. I recently attended a Sydney Trains industry briefing. It was refreshing. The leaderships got up in front of the room and they were really open and honest about the challenges that they faced. They were vulnerable, to be honest. They offered they shared the principles of the work that was ahead of them. They were honest in saying that they didn't understand, they didn't have the answers for how to deliver it. They asked questions and they received questions and they answered those questions, and then we all had a cup of tea, and people, including all those partners in that ecosystem, were there. So suppliers and designers and contractors, the owners. And if Sydney Trains listens to what came out of that forum and takes that away with the contracting strategy that they put to market, then they'll receive value for money from the outcome of that tender. Thank you.
Thanks, Rebecca. The reference to the comments made by Minister Stokes last week, I think, are really interesting, and I know that there were quite a few people within our organisation and other organisations who looked at that as an attack on the industry. But I actually take a slightly different view as far as that's concerned. I think that it's actually a good challenge to us as an industry as to what we can actually do and how we can work more effectively together. I think all of us have been involved in projects where we know that we haven't necessarily achieved the most efficient outcome at the end of the day. Now, that might be a constraint that has been put on us by a program, it might be a constraint that's been put on us by a standard, it might be a constraint that has been put on us by availability of materials. But what I want to talk a little bit about is how we can actually structure the way in which we operate to reduce that waste, reduce that inefficiency. But we all, and by that I mean the full ecosystem that Rebecca has spoken about, all need to be aligned towards a common goal and not have other things in our way that are causing us to create that inefficiency. So it really is about collaboration between partners in the project life cycle. It is also about, and I know that often this is something that people don't really want to talk about, but the liability regimes that are put in place on contractors, on designers, that do then create adverse outcomes sometimes to what we're actually trying to achieve. So this is not a great diagram, and it's taken me a little bit of time to try and represent what I'm trying to show, but really what I'm trying to talk about here with the diagram is we have multiple phases through our project life cycle. And we've all been involved in projects where you have some work done by a concept design team, gets handed over to a detailed design team, and you're told at that point in time, yeah, we're not really sure about that. We're not really sure about that concept that's being developed. So we want you to take a fresh look at it. We're being told this team has done all this investigation work, but you can't rely on any of that. So just take it, and if it looks good, then, but it's all your responsibility, and you've got to take the ownership of that. Contractors are being told the same thing when they sign up to a D&C contract, but they don't necessarily always understand all the implications of those issues, so that's then being passed down to designers to deal with. So what I'm looking at and advocating here is we shouldn't be having hard gates and hard stops at each of these project life cycle points. And that's what I'm trying to show with the little bit of bleeding either side of those different design gates. Wouldn't it be nice to have a situation where a concept designer turns up and hands over to a detailed designer a package along with a briefing on, here's the challenges that we faced, here's why we did this, here's the reason why this looks like this, which you might be scratching your heads over. And we have an appropriate discussion around, here's the level of data that we've got available, this is the extent to which we're confident and comfortable of it, and these are the things that I think you need to look into further. Why don't we do that? Because in the first place, the concept designer is scared about the fact that if anything's wrong that they've done and something happens down the track that causes additional money to the client, to the contractor, to whoever, they're going to get whacked and end up putting their hands in their pockets and pulling something out, money out in relation to that. How do we create, and I know it's not an easy problem to solve and I don't have all the answers, but these are some of the things I think we need to look at. The other thing that, and it's also obviously going to the other end as well too, when you look at the maintainers and the operators as well too, how can we make sure that those people are involved right at the start of these projects so that we understand what those requirements and those obligations are, but also how can we make sure that that team are also incentivised to reduce waste, incentivised to challenge some of the standards that we have in place and look to a different way of doing things. I was actually involved in a discussion at the start of the week with Minister Stokes, with some of the other senior people from Transport for New South Wales and some others in the industry, where I made the point that the question was asked, why are we not innovating? You know, why are we not innovating to create greater sustainability outcomes? Why are we not seeing all that come through? And the point that I made at the time was innovation is hard right now. So if we're in a situation where we're given the choice, we've got really short deadlines in a lot of the projects that we're delivering, we have an objective to deliver something by a certain time, we can do it the same way we've always done it, make sure we get it done on time, and we know we're going to get a tick in terms of the reviewers when that comes through, and it'll make easy passageway through that comments process. If we want to do something different, then the reward at the end of that has to be significantly greater than the challenges we know we're going to face on the way through. Because we know it's going to take an extra round of the comment review process. We know it's going to take some extra work to convince people that this something slightly different that we're doing is acceptable. So how do we make sure that everyone is incentivised around that same goal? If the number one thing we want to do in industry is create a greater sustainability outcome, or if that's as important as the cost of the project, if that's as important, or if it's actually referenced in the cost, then everyone in that project lifestyle, in that project ecosystem, needs to be incentivised in the same way. The other point I want to make in relation to this, and it'll come up later on, is the digital model that we use as well too. And similarly, how can we make sure that that model goes the whole way through that project life cycle, not created by one, again handed over with no reliance or no reliability on that information, but clear definitions around the limits to which the detail is contained within that model, and how can we make sure that it then also comes through to the operations and maintenance team at the end of the day in a useful format that they can then use to maintain that asset in the longer term. So I've touched on a lot of these items already, and I'm not going to go through them one by one, but I've talked about supporting innovation, I've talked about aligned incentivisation. One of the things that is a major issue for the designers and consultants at the moment is professional indemnity insurance. It is a big challenge and a big problem for us. Government is well aware of that. I know they're trying to do things about it, but iCare and others are struggling with that as well. I did talk about flexibility of standards. It is something that we all need to be looking at, and we all need to be challenging collectively, rather than looking at it and saying, no, that's too hard. Now I want to move on to opportunity 3. So I touched on a little bit earlier, but increasing the digitisation of the design process. We've all embraced digital delivery in a lot of cases. We're all looking at opportunities as to how we can make things more efficient. Rebecca touched on earlier the reams of 2D drawings that we still produce that are not always used and often are totally unnecessary. This all puts extra pressure, extra cost on the team delivering these projects under tight timeframe constraints. We've got to look at how we can use these models more effectively. We've got to look at how we can make sure they do go the whole way through the project life cycle. We've got to look at how we can make sure that they're really useful from an operations and maintenance perspective at the end of the day. There are also significant advantages that can be achieved through generative design tools and generative design processes as well too. We had some great examples on some project, particular Forestfield Airport Link project in Western Australia, similar to a lot of the work that is coming up in Sydney and done in Sydney and line-wide works at the moment in generative design processes around the actual track, the sleepers, and a lot of the infrastructure within the tunnel. Saved a huge amount of time, produces designs that, if they're reviewed at the start, should be easier and simpler to construct because they're more repetitive. We need to be able to have everyone operating effectively within these models, reviewing designs within these models, taking out the time needed for different review processes and submissions along the way. And then, again, as I said, understand and only produce what's needed. I touched on Forestfield Airport Link. This is some examples out of the model there, but the generative design aspect was the one that really did create significant advantages in time and cost as far as that was concerned. I do want to touch quickly, for those of you that aren't aware of it, as Rebecca mentioned, I have been involved with Consult Australia and the New South Wales Branch Committee. If you haven't had a look at it, the model client policy that Consult Australia has produced is a really good document in terms of understanding some of the constraints from a consultant's perspective or a design perspective in the way in which we operate and the way in which we could create contracts and we could create engagements that are far more collaborative, do create far better outcomes for the industry in the long run. And that's it in terms of our presentation. So thank you everyone for listening. And yeah, we really do believe that it's not about creating. There are too many adversarial relationships within our industry in terms of the projects that we deliver. If we do all approach this with the spirit of collaborating, then we can really reduce waste in what we're doing. So thanks a lot.